Elias Thorne's ghost lived in the silence after a phone goes dead. It was the echo of a promise he had failed to keep, a life he had failed to negotiate for. He had been the best hostage negotiator in the city, a man whose voice was a finely tuned instrument of calm, a savant of de-escalation. He could build a bridge of trust to the most broken, violent souls. Until the day his bridge collapsed. It was a bank robbery. A young, terrified kid with a gun and nothing to lose. Elias had him on the phone for 6 hours. He followed the protocol, the script that had saved dozens of lives. He built rapport. He offered solutions. He was minutes away from a peaceful surrender when something shifted. A flicker of doubt in his own voice, a moment of hesitation. The kid heard it. The shot that followed was not Elias's failure, the review board had said, but he knew it was. He had lost the connection. A teller, a mother of two, was critically wounded. Elias had turned in his badge the next day. He had traded his high-stakes world for a quiet, self-imposed exile in a small, anonymous apartment. His only companion, the ghost of his own failure. He now made a living doing freelance security consulting, work that required his analytical mind but not his heart. He kept the world at a safe, sterile distance. That is, until his past came knocking. It came in the form of his old captain, Eva Rostova, a woman with tired eyes and a will of iron. She found him in a sterile coffee shop, his back to the wall, a habit he couldn't shake. "I need you, Eli," she said without preamble. "One last time." "The answer is no, Eva," he said, not looking up from his laptop. "It's a museum," she pressed on, sliding a tablet across the table. A man named Abernathy barricaded himself in the impressionist wing. He's not violent, but he's not talking. He's been in there for 12 hours. My negotiators are hitting a wall. He's just waiting. Waiting for what? Elias asked, despite himself. "That's the part you're not going to believe," she said. "He's not asking for money. He's asking for a ghost." She tapped the screen. The single, typed demand read, "I want my wife's perfume. I want to smell it one last time." The mobile command unit outside the museum was a hive of tents. Quiet activity. Elias stood before a bank of monitors, the old, familiar weight of a headset settling over his ears. He felt like a fraud, a soldier returning to a battlefield where he had already been defeated. The file on the barricaded man, Arthur Abernathy, was thin and tragic. He was a 68-year-old retired literature professor whose wife, Eleanor, had passed away from cancer 6 months prior. He had no criminal record, no history of violence. He had simply walked into the museum that morning, waited until the gallery was empty, and triggered the emergency lockdown. The single painting in the room with him was Monet's Woman with a Parasol, a painting he and his wife had visited on their anniversary every year for 40 years. The perfume, Elias said to the research team. "What have you found?" A young analyst shook her head in frustration. "That's the problem, Thorne. It doesn't exist. Not anymore." Eleanor Abernathy wore a custom blend. It was made for her 30 years ago at a tiny artisanal perfumery in the old arts district called Ephemera. The shop closed down 15 years ago. The owner passed away. The formulas are gone. Elias looked at the grainy photo of the perfume bottle from an old family album. It was a simple, elegant flagon with no commercial label. A dead end. There has to be someone, he insisted. An apprentice, a family member. The analyst tapped a few keys. The owner had one apprentice, a young woman she took on in the shop's final years. Her name is Isla. She runs her own small perfumery now, also called Ephemera, out on the coast. It's more of a hobby shop, according to the records. Sells scented candles, soaps, nothing like the high-end custom work the original shop was known for. Get me the address. Elias said, I'm going to see her. Eva Rostova put a hand on his arm. Eli, this is a long shot. The woman is probably just a soap maker. What can she possibly do? She's the only thread we have. Elias said, his jaw tight. In my old job, I learned that you don't dismiss the small threads. Sometimes they're the only thing that can pull a man back from the edge. He left the tense, sterile world of command unit and drove toward the coast, toward a woman who made soap and a ghost he had to somehow capture in a bottle. Isla's shop, Ephemera, was tucked away on a quiet street that smelled of salt and fog. It was a tiny, magical space, cluttered with glass bottles of every shape and size, bundles of dried herbs hanging from the ceiling, and stacks of old, leather-bound books on botany and alchemy. The air inside was a complex symphony of scents: lavender, sandalwood, citrus, and something else, something warm and resinous like old memories. A woman with long, dark, wild hair was standing behind a counter, grinding something in a marble mortar. This was Isla. She looked up as he entered, and her eyes, the color of moss after a rain, seemed to see more than he was comfortable with. I'm closed, she said, her voice soft but firm. My name is Elias Thorne, he began, pulling out a consultant ID. I'm with the police department. I need your help with a delicate situation. He explained the standoff at the museum, the man, the painting, the impossible demand for the lost perfume. He kept his tone clinical, factual, a narrator delivering a report. Isla listened, her hands never stopping their steady, grinding rhythm. When he finished, she didn't ask about the police tactics or the man's motivations. She asked a question that threw him completely off balance. Tell me about the man inside, she said. The one you're trying to save. What does his grief smell like? Elias stared at her. What is it? I don't understand the question. Of course you do, she said, finally setting down her pestle. She wiped her hands on her apron and leaned on the counter, her moss-green eyes studying him. Every emotion has a scent. Your grief, she said, her gaze so direct it felt like a physical touch, smells of iron, of old blood and rusted metal, a failure you can't wash off. Elias felt a cold shock go through him. It was as if she had reached into his chest and held his most private wound in her hand. That's ridiculous, he managed, his voice tight. Is it? She said, her voice softening. Scent is the oldest sense. It's tied directly to memory and emotion. It bypasses logic. That's why Mr. Abernathy isn't asking for a photograph. He's asking for a feeling. I can't recreate a formula I've never seen. But if you can help me understand the feeling of his wife's love, I might be able to create a new scent that tells the same story. How? He asked, his skepticism warring with a desperate sliver of hope. You are a negotiator, she said. You build bridges with words. You will be my translator. You will talk to Mr. Abernathy. You will get him to talk about his wife. Not the fact of her life. Her name, her age, the essence of her. What did her laughter feel like? Was it bright like bergamot or warm like vanilla when she held him? Did it feel like the security of cedarwood or the softness of musk? She picked up a small, empty glass bottle. You bring me the memories. I will give you the ghost. Elias stood in the fragrant, chaotic shop, his logical, protocol-driven world tilting on its axis. This was insane. It was voodoo. It was also the only plan he had. The mobile command unit became their shared world. It was a stark contrast of philosophies. Elias's side was all stereotechnology. Monitors, audio mixers, psychological profiles printed in neat binders. Isla's side was a traveling apothecary. A wooden box filled with dozens of small vials of essential oils, strips of blotter paper, and a small set of brass scales. The air in the unit became a strange, complex perfume of her work and his tension. Elias got Abernathy on the phone. The old professor's voice was weak, fragile, but resolute. I won't leave without it, Abernathy said. I just want to remember her properly one last time. Elias began his protocol, his voice a calm, steady anchor. Arthur, I understand. I want to help you with that. Can you tell me about Eleanor? What was she like? She was the sun, Abernathy said, his voice thick with tears. Elias relayed the words to Isla. She was sitting with her eyes closed, listening intently not just to the words, but to the emotion behind them. The sun, she murmured. She reached for her vials. Not a simple citrus. Not a bright, sharp lemon. His sun is a warm, gentle light. It's narrowly from the orange blossom. It's sweet, but with a hint of green, a hint of life. She placed a single drop on a blotter strip and held it out to Elias. Smell. Is that his sun? He took the strip, bewildered. He smelled it. The scent was incredibly, surprisingly evocative. It did smell like a gentle, warm light. For hours, this was their process. Elias would talk to Abernathy, coaxing out memories. Abernathy spoke of their first dance, his hand on the small of her back, her dress smelling of the night-blooming jasmine in her mother's garden. He spoke of the leather-bound books of poetry she loved, the scent of old paper and vanilla. He spoke of the rose garden she tended with fierce, loving hands. With each memory, Isla would translate the emotion into a scent. Jasmine for first touch, she'd say. A bass note of vanilla and benzoin for the comfort of the library. And rose, of course. Not a sweet, simple rose. A deep, complex damask rose. with a hint of earthy soil to represent the garden she tended. Elias was a conduit between two worlds. He was speaking the language of grief to a broken man, and translating it into the language of scent for a woman who seemed to operate on a different sensory plane entirely. And in the process, something inside him began to shift. He was so focused on Abernathy's loss that he was forced to confront his own. To translate another man's grief, he had to access his own empathy, a part of himself he had locked away in an iron box. He found himself remembering the smile of the teller he had failed to save. He remembered the scent of her cheap floral perfume, a scent he had tried for 5 years to forget. "You're trembling," Isla said quietly one afternoon, noticing his hands. "It's nothing," he said, his voice rough. "No, it's not," she replied, her moss-green eyes full of a wisdom that unnerved him. "It's the iron. It's starting to rust." Not everyone was convinced by their unconventional methods. A senior officer, Deputy Chief Malik, a man who believed in tactics over talk, was losing his patience. "This is a circus, Rostova," he barked at Eve in the command unit, loud enough for Elias and Isla to hear. "We have a man occupying a museum, and you've got a disgraced negotiator and a witch doctor making potpourri. It's been 24 hours. It's time to end this. My tactical team can be in there in 5 minutes." "You will stand down, Malik," Eva said, her voice like ice. "Thorne is making progress. You go in with force, and you risk a peaceful man doing something desperate. He's already desperate." Malik shot back. "This whole perfume thing is a stall tactic. He's probably planting explosives in there while we're smelling flowers. He's a literature professor, Malik, not a terrorist," Elias said, turning from his console. "His only weapon is his grief. And grief doesn't respond to a battering ram," Isla added softly, not looking up from her work. Malik just snorted and stormed out, but his threat hung in the air. The clock was ticking. They were running out of time. The pressure began to wear on Elias. That evening, he hit a wall. Abernathy had grown quiet, retreating into his sorrow, refusing to share any more memories. "It's not working, Isla," Elias said, pulling off his headset in frustration. "He's shutting down. I'm losing him, just like I lost the kid in the bank." The confession was out before he could stop it. Isla stopped her work and finally gave him her full attention. "Tell me about him," she said. "What?" "The kid in the bank. The one who made your grief smell like iron. Tell me." He didn't want to. He had never spoken of it aloud. But under her patient, unwavering gaze, the story spilled out. He told her about the 6 hours on the phone, the protocol, the flicker of doubt, the shot. "I followed every rule," he finished, his voice raw. "I did everything the book said, and she still got hurt." "And what did it feel like?" Isla asked gently. "In that last moment, the failure. It felt," he whispered, "like a door slamming shut, like a connection breaking. It felt cold." Isla nodded slowly. She then reached for a small, dark bottle. It was vetiver oil. Earthy, woody, a little smoky. She placed a single drop on a blotter strip and held out to him. "This is the scent of grief," she said, "of endings, of the earth after fire. It's the bass note of Mr. Abernathy's pain. But a perfume can't be all bass notes. It needs a heart. It needs a top note to give it light." She looked at him. "You've been so focused on Abernathy's grief and your own that you've forgotten to ask about the joy. You haven't asked him what her love smelled like when it was alive." Her words were a key turning a lock in his mind. He had been negotiating with the loss, not with the love. It was the same mistake he had made 5 years ago. He had been so focused on the protocol, on the danger, that he had forgotten to connect with a human being on the other end of the line. He picked up the headset again, his hand steady for the first time in days. "Arthur," he said into the mic, his voice different now, warmer, softer. "Let's talk about the good days. Tell me about her garden." Abernathy began to talk, and as he spoke, Isla worked with a quiet, focused intensity. He spoke of the scent of wet soil after a spring rain, petrichor, which she mimicked with a blend of oak moss and patchouli. He spoke of the sharp, clean scent of the tomato vine she loved to crush between her fingers, a note Isla captured with a rare galbanum absolute. And then came the heart, her laugh. Abernathy said, his voice full of a beautiful, aching nostalgia. It was like peeling a tangerine on a sunny day. Bright, sweet, and it just filled the room with light. Isla smiled, a genuine, radiant smile. "There it is," she whispered. She reached for her most precious oils, tangerine, bergamot, and a touch of mimosa for the powdery softness of the sun. This was the top note, the joy. She began to build the perfume, drop by drop, on a clean blotter strip. The base notes of vanilla, leather, and rose. The heart notes of jasmine and tomato leaf. And now, the bright, sparkling top notes of citrus and mimosa. She worked for an hour, a master composer arranging a symphony of memories. Finally, she was done. She dipped a final, clean strip into blend and held it out to Elias. He took it and inhaled. It was uncanny. The scent was a story. It was a walk through a rose garden after a rainstorm, into a warm library filled with old books, and finally, into a sun-drenched room where someone was laughing as they peeled a tangerine. It was the scent of a life. It was the scent of love. "Isla, how?" he whispered, stunned. "You told me the story," she said simply. "I just wrote it down." She carefully decanted the blend into the small, empty bottle. "There is your ghost negotiator," she said, handing it to him. "Now go bring him home." Just then, Malik burst back into command unit, his face grim. "That's it. Time's up. My team is going in." "No!" Elias and Eva shouted in unison. "You have 5 minutes, Thorn," Eva said, standing between Elias and Malik. 5 minutes to work your miracle, or I'm letting him breach." Elias looked at the small bottle in his hand, then at the tactical team assembling outside. The ghost of his past failure rose up, whispering in his ear, "You'll hesitate. You'll fail again." He looked at Isla. She simply met his gaze and nodded once, a silent vote of absolute confidence. He took a deep breath, the scent of the perfume filling his senses, and walked towards a museum. He wasn't armed with a protocol or a script. He was armed with a memory. Elias didn't use the megaphone. He stood at the heavy oak doors of the gallery, the small vial of perfume in his hand. "Arthur," he said, his voice calm and clear, amplified only by the silence of the museum. "It's Elias. I have something for you." There was no response from inside. "I've spent the last 2 days listening to you talk about Eleanor," Elias continued, "and I feel as though I knew her. I know about her rose garden and the way she loved the scent of old books. I know her laughter sounded like sunshine." He uncapped the bottle and sprayed a small amount of the perfume onto a white handkerchief Isla had given him. Isla, the perfumer, she listened to, and she made this for you, for Eleanor. He pushed the handkerchief through the mail slot in the door. For a long, agonizing minute, there was only silence. Malik's team tense, ready to move. Elias stood his ground, waiting. Then, from inside the gallery came a sound, a single, ragged sob. It was a sound of profound, heartbreaking release. The locks on the door clicked, one by one. The heavy door swung open. Arthur Abernathy stood there, his face streaked with tears, the white handkerchief clutched in his hand. He wasn't a threat. He was just a man drowning in grief who had finally been thrown a lifeline. He looked at Elias, his eyes full of a dawning, bewildered gratitude. He then sank to his knees, the sobs shaking his entire body. Elias didn't move to restrain him. He simply knelt in front of him, a silent witness to the man's sorrow. The negotiation was over. Empathy had won. Later, after Abernathy had been led away peacefully for a psychological evaluation, the museum was filled with police officers and museum officials. But Elias and Isla stood to one side in the quiet aftermath. "You did it," she said softly. "No," he replied, looking at her, his eyes full of a new, unguarded warmth. "We did it. I was just the translator." He looked down at his hands. They were perfectly still. The ghost was gone. He realized that in helping another man face his grief, he had finally found a way to face his own. The iron scent of his failure had been replaced by something else, something he couldn't quite name. It smelled, he thought, like hope. The story of the perfume negotiation became a quiet legend within the department. Elias was hailed as a hero, his unconventional methods suddenly seen as brilliant. He was offered his old job back, with a promotion. He turned it down. Why? Eva Rostova asked him as they sat in her office a week later. "Because that job requires a man who follows the protocol," Elias said. "And I'm not that man anymore. I broke the most important rule." "Which one was that?" "I got involved," he said. "I felt it. That's not a sustainable way to do the job, Eva, but I think it's the only way I want to live my life." He didn't go back to his sterile consulting work. He found himself drawn again and again to the coast, to the small, fragrant shop called Ephemera. He would just show up, sometimes with coffee, sometimes with a book of poetry he thought Islam might like. He helped her install new shelves. He learned the names of her herbs. He sat and listened as she explained the difference between a top note and a heart note. One afternoon, she was working on a new scent in her workshop. He was sitting in a corner, just reading, enjoying the quiet company. "Your scent has changed," she said suddenly, not looking up from her work. "Yes?" "Yes," she said. "The iron is gone. The rust. It's been replaced by something else." She paused, dabbing a new blend on her wrist and inhaling. "It smells like warm earth after good rain. Petrichor, the scent of healing." He looked at her, at the quiet, powerful magic she worked with her hands and her heart. He had spent his life trying to control chaos with words. She spent hers creating beauty out of it. "Isla," he began, his voice a little rough. She finally looked up, her moss-green eyes meeting his. "Yes, Elias?" "I was wondering," he said, a slow smile spreading across his face, "if you might be able to tell me what my joy smells like. I think I'm ready to find out." She returned his smile, a radiant, knowing expression that filled the small room with light. "I think," she said, "it smells a lot like this." And in the quiet, fragrant air of her small shop, surrounded by the stories of 1,000 different flowers and memories, they began to write a new story, one that didn't need translating. It was a simple scent, with a bass note of healing, a heart of quiet understanding, and a top note that smelled unmistakably like a new beginning. If the story about the healing power of empathy and unconventional connection spoke to you, we would be so grateful to hear from you. Where in the world are you today? Every story has a home, and we'd love for you to share yours in the comments. What scent reminds you of love or healing? We'd love to read your stories. Liking, sharing, and subscribing is the essence that allows us to keep creating and sharing these stories with the world. Turn on notifications so you never miss a new creation. Thank you for being here, for listening, and for believing in the power of the invisible threads that connect us all. Until next time, may you be brave enough to inhale the story of your own life. The silence of the Ataraxia Corp headquarters at 3:14 a.m. was a special kind of silence. It wasn't empty. It was heavy, humming with the ghost energy of 1,000 sleeping computers and the faint, ozonic scent of immense electrical power held in stasis. This was the world Arthur Pendleton patrolled. At 82, his steps were slow but deliberate. His gait a gentle shuffle that knew every inch of the polished concrete floors. He wasn't just a night watchman. He was the building's quiet confessor, its nocturnal witness. His uniform, a size too large, was immaculate. His silver hair, thin but neatly combed, shone under the cold LED strips that lined the hallways. In a small security booth by the main entrance, nestled between a bank of intimidating monitors he rarely looked at, sat a single, extraordinary plant. It was an orchid, a ghost orchid, but of a variety no botanist would recognize. Its petals were a spectral white, almost translucent, and it bloomed with a fierce defiance against the sterile, climate-controlled air. He called it Ilara's Hope. It was the last living piece of his wife he had. Tonight, his patrol route took him past the company's crown jewel and its most expensive failure, the Biodome, a 6-story glass sphere in the center of the campus. It was meant to be a self-sustaining ecosystem, a testament to Ataraxia's genius in AI-driven environmental control. But it was dying. Inside the sphere, under the glow of $1 million simulated sun, the exotic flora from the Amazon to the Congo were yellowing, their leaves curling like burnt paper. The air, meant to be thick with life, smelled of decay. Kalen Vance, the 32-year-old CEO of Ataraxia, saw it every day from his penthouse office. He saw on the live data feeds that covered one wall of his minimalist space. charts showing soil pH, humidity, nutrient levels, all screaming red alerts. He had fired 3 teams of top-tier botanists and data scientists. He'd installed more sensors, more algorithms, more everything, and still it died. The biodome was a mirror of his own career. A meteoric rise followed by a baffling, inexplicable rot. The investors were getting nervous. Their whispers followed him down the hallways like the rustle of dead leaves. Arthur stood outside the glass, his breath fogging a small patch at eye level. He didn't see data points. He saw thirsty roots, suffocating soil, and lonely plants. He saw a forest that had forgotten how to speak to itself. He'd seen this before in a patch of clay-heavy soil behind his first home, the one he shared with Alara. The experts had said nothing would grow there. Alara had just smiled, handed him a spade, and said, "The earth is just waiting for the right conversation." He looked at the intricate network of pipes and misters, the automated nutrient injectors. They were shouting at the soil, but they weren't listening to it. Arthur pulled a small, worn leather-bound notebook from his breast pocket and a stub of a pencil. He scribbled a few words on a loose page. Soil is too dense. No aeration. The worms can't breathe. Check the mycorrhizal network. It's silent. He folded the note, walked to the main entrance of the dome, and slipped it under the door, a message in a bottle tossed into an ocean of technology. He knew it was a foolish gesture. He was just a night watchman, an invisible old man, but he had to try. The forest was crying for help, and he was the only one who seemed to hear it. The note, as Arthur expected, did not start a revolution. A cleaner, humming along to music from her earbuds, found it during the 6 a.m. sweep. Seeing the shaky, pencil-written script, she dismissed it as a lost note from a visitor's child or perhaps the ramblings of a senile mind. Without a second thought, she swept it into her dustpan and dumped it into the recycling bin destined for pulping. The message was lost. The forest inside the dome continued its slow, silent march toward oblivion. Later that day, a young woman named Lena Petrova pushed her wire-rimmed glasses up her nose and stared at her own monitor, located in the sprawling, open-plan office of the junior software engineering department. Her screen showed the same data as the CEO's, just with fewer privileges. She was tasked with writing code to analyze the failure patterns. It was a miserable job, documenting a death in excruciating detail. She was a coder, but she'd grown up on her grandmother's farm, her hands perpetually stained with the rich, dark soil of the earth. She knew, deep in her bones, that the answer wasn't in the code. That evening, frustrated and restless, she decided to work late. The office emptied out, the loud hum of collaboration replaced by the quiet hum of servers. Around 9 p.m., she walked to the coffee machine, which was located with a view of the biodome. And there she saw him. Arthur, the old night watchman, wasn't at his desk. He was standing in front of the massive, glowing schematics of the biodome projected on the lobby wall. He was holding a magnifying glass, an actual old-fashioned magnifying glass, to the screen, his brow furrowed in intense concentration. He'd occasionally make a note in his little leather book. Lena froze, fascinated. She had seen him on his rounds, always a polite nod and a soft, "Good evening." She thought of him as a fixture, part of the building's furniture. But this was different. He wasn't just looking, he was studying. He was interrogating the plans with a focus she hadn't seen in any of the high-paid consultants who had paraded through the office. She was about to approach him when his supervisor, a burly man named Henderson with a chip on his shoulder, came by. "Pendleton, what do you think you're doing? You're paid to walk, not to gawk. Get back on your route." Arthur didn't flinch. He simply nodded, pocketed his notebook and magnifying glass, and shuffled away, his quiet dignity a shield against the man's abrasive tone. Lena felt a spark of anger on his behalf. As she headed back to her desk, She passed the recycling bins the cleaners had left out. A flicker or something, a folded piece of paper with that same shaky handwriting, caught her eye, curiosity overriding protocol. She reached in and pulled it out. She unfolded it. Soil is too dense. No aeration. The worms can't breathe. Check the mycorrhizal network. It's silent. Lena read it once, then twice. Mycorrhizal network. The symbiotic relationship between fungi and plant roots. It was a term she hadn't heard since her university biology classes. It wasn't something you could measure with a humidity sensor. It was about life. She looked from the note to the dying dome, then back to her screen full of useless data. A wild, improbable idea began to form in her mind. This old man, he saw things they didn't. He was listening to a different frequency. The next evening, Lena waited for Arthur. She brought 2 cups of tea from a fancy machine, the kind the executives used. She found him in his booth, carefully polishing the leaves of his orchid with a soft cloth. "Mr. Pendleton?" she began, her voice tentative. Arthur looked up, his eyes a pale, gentle blue. He seemed surprised to be addressed by name. "Miss Petrova." "Please, call me Lena. I brought you some tea." She held out a cup. "And I found this." She placed the rescued note on the counter between them. Arthur looked at the note, then at her. A flicker of emotion, surprise, disappointment, crossed his face before being replaced by a placid calm. "Ah, yes, a foolish thought. Pay it no mind." "I don't think it's foolish," Lena said, her voice gaining confidence. "I think it's brilliant. We have a million sensors in there, but none of them are checking for life, for the connections between things." She gestured to his orchid. "Like this. It's beautiful. You must be a wonderful gardener." A rare, small smile touched Arthur's lips. "My wife, Ilara, was a gardener. I was just her assistant." He looked at the flower with a deep, aching tenderness. "She used to say that all the technology in the world can't convince a seed to grow if it doesn't feel safe." They talked for nearly an hour. Arthur, hesitant at first, slowly opened up. He spoke of soil composition, not as a chemical equation, but as a recipe for a community. He talked about companion planting, how some plants protect each other, how others enrich the soil for their neighbors. He didn't use jargon. He used stories. He spoke of the earth as a living, breathing entity. Lena was mesmerized. It was a language she understood instinctively, a wisdom that resonated far more than the cold logic of her code. On her desk, she had a small, pathetic-looking succulent that was slowly giving up on life. Inspired, she asked Arthur what she could do. "That one," he said after she described it, "is lonely. It needs a friend. Find a small jade plant and pot them together. And put a little gravel at the bottom of the pot. It needs to feel like its feet aren't wet." The next day, Lena bought a tiny jade plant and a small bag of aquarium gravel. She felt a little silly, following the advice of the night watchman against all the horticultural blogs she'd read. She repotted her succulent, placing its new friend beside it. A week passed. The biodome continued its decline. Kaylin Vance grew more haggard. But on Lena's desk, something remarkable happened. The little succulent, which had been a sad, grayish-green, began to plump up. Its color deepened. It looked happy. The jade plant next to it seemed to stand a little taller. It wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. Lena stared at the 2 plants, then looked out at the 6-story glass tomb. The answer wasn't in the data. The answer was in a quiet old man who spent his nights polishing the leaves of his late wife's orchid. And she knew, with a certainty that terrified and thrilled her, that she had to do something. The crisis reached its boiling point on a Tuesday. A sleek, black car delivered a letter from their primary investor, a man whose patience had finally evaporated. The letter's ultimatum was cold and clear. Show a tangible turnaround in the Biodome project within 30 days, or the funding that constituted 40% of Ataraxia's operating budget would be pulled. The news ripped through the executive wing like a shockwave. Kalen Vance called an emergency meeting. He stood before his team, his usual sharp suit looking rumpled, his face pale with a sleepless fury. Another week, another $1 million wasted, he seethed, slamming a tablet onto the polished mahogany table. It cracked. No one flinched. The latest report from the experts at Omnibotanic suggests we recalibrate the atmospheric ionizers. Does anyone here even know what that means? Does anyone have a single idea that doesn't involve buying another useless $1 million machine? The room was silent. The executives stared at the table, at their hands, anywhere but their enraged CO. In a final, desperate act of fury, Kalen pointed a trembling finger at the current head of the Biodome project. "You're fired. Get out." The man, a renowned botanist with a string of degrees, simply nodded, gathered his things, and walked out of the room, his face a mask of weary resignation. He was the fourth one. The silence that followed was even heavier. Kalen sank into his chair, rubbing his temples. "I'm surrounded by the best minds in the world, and we're being defeated by houseplants." It was then that Lena, who had been brought in to take notes, did the bravest thing she had ever done. She stood up, her heart hammered against her ribs. Every eye in the room swiveled to her, the junior coder, the intern-level nobody. "Mr. Vance," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "What if the problem isn't the technology?" Kalen looked up, his expression a mixture of irritation and exhaustion. "Then what is it, Petrova? Bad karma? Mercury in retrograde?" "It's the approach," she pressed on, emboldened by her own audacity. "We're treating it like a machine. But it's not. It's a living system, a community. And we've forgotten the language it speaks." A senior VP snorted. "The language of plants? Are you suggesting we hire a psychic?" "No," Lena said, shaking her head. "I'm suggesting we talk to someone who already knows the language. A consultant, an unconventional one." Kalen stared at her, a dangerous glint in his eye. He was desperate, but he was also a man who hated being made a fool. "I'm listening. Who is this guru of yours? Some crystal-wielding shaman from Sedona?" Lena took a deep breath. "His name is Arthur Pendleton. He's been with the company for 15 years. He has more experience with living systems than anyone in this room." The VP of operations, a man named Marcus Thorne who had a vested interest in the expensive tech contracts, laughed out loud. "Pendleton? You mean the night watchman? Lena, the old man who shuffles down the halls? Is this a prank?" Lena's cheeks burned, but she held her ground. "His shuffling takes him past that dome every night. And unlike us, he's been watching. Really watching. He sees things we don't." Kalen was silent. He looked from the sneering face of his VP to the earnest, defiant expression of the young coder. It was absurd. It was insane. But it was also the only new idea he had heard in 6 months. Every other option was just a more expensive version of failure. "Fine," he said, the word dropping like a stone in the silent room. "Set it up. I'll meet with your consultant. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. conference room 4. He stood up, his eyes sweeping over the stunned faces of his team. "But Petrova," he added, his voice dropping to a deadly quiet. "If this is a waste of my time, you'll be cleaning out your desk right behind him." Conference room 4 was all glass, chrome, and black leather. It was a room designed for power plays and multi-million-dollar deals. At 9:59 a.m., Kalen Vance swept in, flanked by Marcus Thorne and two other skeptical VPs. They saw Lena standing nervously by the smartboard, and next to her, holding a simple, worn tweed cap in his hands, stood Arthur Pendleton. He wore his Chris security guard uniform, his posture straight, his expression calm. Kalen stopped dead. The reality of the situation hit him. He was about to take advice on his flagship billion-dollar project from the company Janitor. No, the Night Watchman. The absurdity was overwhelming. Thorne snickered under his breath. "You've got to be kidding me," Kalen said, his voice dangerously low. "Petrova, what is this?" "This is a consultant, sir," Lena said, her voice trembling slightly but her resolve firm. "This is Mr. Pendleton." Kalen shot a venomous glare at Arthur. "With all due respect, old man, what could you possibly know about exascale data processing and atmospheric regulation?" Arthur did not seem intimidated. He simply looked at Kalen with his clear, steady eyes. "Sir, you could have the smartest clock in the world, but it can't tell you the time if the hands are broken. Your technology is shouting, but the dome has gone deaf." He then walked past the stunned executives to the floor-to-ceiling window that overlooked the sickened biodome. He raised a gnarled finger and pointed to a single Dracaena plant, its leaves pathetic brown. "Look there," he said, his voice soft but resonant. "That leaf isn't dying from a lack of nitrogen. It's dying of loneliness. Its fungal partner in the soil is dead. The entire network, the Wood Wide Web as some call it, has collapsed. You are watering a graveyard and expecting a forest." Marcus Thorne stepped forward. "That's sentimental nonsense. Our sensors indicate." "Your sensors," Arthur interrupted gently, turning to face him, "can tell you the temperature of the water, but they can't tell you if the plant is thirsty. They measure data, not life. You build a prison and are shocked the inmates are unwell." Kalen, for all his fury, was momentarily speechless. The old man spoke with an authority that belied his uniform. It wasn't the jargon of a scientist, but the certainty of a master craftsman. "This is a waste of time," Thorne declared, looking at Kalen. "Let's go." Kalen was about to agree to end this farce and fire the girl who started it. But then he looked into Arthur's eyes. He saw no fear, no arrogance. He saw a deep, profound sadness for the dying plants. He saw a lifetime of knowledge etched into the lines on the old man's face. Desperation warred with pride. Desperation won. "What's your solution, then?" Kalen asked, crossing his arms. "Sing to them? Play them Mozart." Arthur met his gaze. "Give me 1 week," he said, his voice even, "and one bed, the sickest one you have. Bed 7 by the southern wall, the one the consultants have written off as completely dead." He held up his hands, calloused and wrinkled. "No technology, no sensors, no nutrient injectors. Just these, and a wheelbarrow." The executives stared, dumbfounded. It was the most ludicrous proposal they had ever heard. Kalen looked at Arthur, then at the dying dome, then back at Arthur. It was career suicide. It was madness. It was also impossibly the only thing that felt real. 1 week, Kalen heard himself say. "You get 1 bed. Lena, you're his project manager. See that he gets what he needs." He turned and walked out of the room without another word, leaving his VPs staring in stunned disbelief at the old night watchman who had just been put in charge of saving their company. The news spread through Ataraxia Corp like a virus. The night watchman was now running an experiment in the biodome. It was a joke of the day, whispered over coffee and in Slack channels. Marcus Thorne made sure to amplify the ridicule, framing it as a sign of their CEO's impending breakdown. Arthur was unfazed. On Monday morning, he arrived not in his uniform, but in a pair of sturdy overalls and worn work boots. He walked past the gawky employees, pushing a simple, slightly rusty wheelbarrow. Lena met him at the dome entrance, holding a key card. Their first obstacle was Henderson, the head of security. "Hold it right there, Pendleton," he barked, blocking their path. "My guards are not permitted to bring in outside contaminants. Corporate policy." "He's not a guard today, Henderson," Lena stated, her voice sharp. "He's a consultant on direct orders from the CEO." "He can't bring in that wheelbarrow," Henderson insisted, pointing a thick finger. "It's probably covered in God knows what." Arthur simply smiled. "You are quite right, Mr. Henderson. Cleanliness is important." He then proceeded to the sanitation station and, with meticulous care, sterilized the wheelbarrow, the spade, and the soles of his boots, following the protocol more carefully than any of the scientists had. Henderson was left sputtering, with no rules left to enforce. Inside, Arthur went straight to bed 7. It was a patch of earth, so lifeless it looked like. The soil was dry, cracked, and sterile. The first thing he did was not add water or fertilizer. He took a spade and began to dig, turning the soil over and over, breaking up the dense, compacted clay. It was hard, slow work. Next, he went to the corporate cafeteria. He ignored the hydroponic lettuces and went straight to the compost bins in the back. He filled his wheelbarrow with coffee grounds, vegetable peels, and eggshells. The kitchen staff stared at him as if he were mad. He wheeled the garbage back to the dome and began working it into the soil with his bare hands. His last trip was to a small, forgotten patch of lawn behind the parking garage. There, he dug up a bucket full of common earthworms. Back in the dome, he gently released them into his prepared bed. For the rest of the week, that was his routine. He would arrive, tend to his small plot, turn the soil, and talk to it. Employees would press their faces to the glass, watching the old man pat the dirt and whisper to it as if it were a sleeping child. Thorne would walk by with potential clients, pointing at Arthur and laughing. And here we have our alternative strategies division. On Friday afternoon, Kalen Vance stood in his office, the ultimatum letter from the investor feeling like a lead weight in his pocket. He looked down at bed 7. It looked just as it had before, a patch of dirt. He felt a fool. The experiment was a failure. He had bet his company on the ramblings of a senile old man. He turned away in disgust. But Lena, watching from a different angle, saw it. She grabbed a pair of binoculars from a scientist's abandoned desk and focused them. And there, nearly invisible against the dark brown earth, was a tiny speck of impossible, brilliant green. A single sprout, no bigger than her pinky nail, was pushing its way up through the soil. She zoomed in, her breath catching in her throat. It was a cotyledon, the first 2 leaves of new life. In a dome filled with millions of dollars of dying flora, in a plot everyone had declared dead, Arthur Pendleton had accomplished a miracle. One small, perfect, defiant sprout. The sprout became a secret pilgrimage site. At first, only Lena knew. Then, she showed a trusted colleague. Soon, a handful of junior engineers and office staff would find excuses to walk past the dome, stealing glances at the tiny green shoot in bed 7. It was a small rebellion of hope against the overwhelming narrative of failure. The rest of the dome, under the purview of Marcus Thorne's automated systems, continued to wither. The contrast was becoming stark, undeniable. Kalen noticed a change not in the data, but in the people. He saw the hushed conversations, the quick looks toward the dome, One night, unable to sleep, he left his empty penthouse and walked down to the silent campus. Drawn by an impulse he didn't understand, he went to Biodome. Through the glass, he saw Arthur. He wasn't digging or watering. He was sitting on an overturned bucket beside his plot, a thermos of tea in his hand, simply watching. The dome simulated moonlight cast a long shadow behind him. He looked like a guardian, a sentinel. Kalen entered the dome, his expensive leather shoes making no sound on the grated floor. "Working late, Mr. Pendleton?" Arthur turned, unsurprised. "The most important work happens when things are quiet, Mr. Vance." He patted the bucket beside him. "Join me?" Hesitantly, Kalen sat. For a long time, neither man spoke. The air around them, unlike the rest of the dome, smelled clean and earthy. It smelled alive. "How did you do it?" Kalen finally asked, his voice stripped of its usual authority. He sounded like a student. "I didn't do anything," Arthur replied softly. "I just made an introduction." The coffee grounds invited the bacteria. The bacteria invited the fungi. The fungi invited the worms. They did the work. I just set the table for the party. He looked at Kalen. You can't force a community to thrive. You can only create the conditions for it to build itself. Kalen stared at the sprout, a tiny life form that was mocking his entire philosophy of control and command. My teams, they had all the resources, the best equipment. They had tools, Arthur corrected, but they didn't have a relationship with the soil, with the plants, with each other. He paused, then reached into the inner pocket of his overalls and pulled out a small velvet pouch. With gentle fingers, he opened it and showed Kalen the Alara's Hope orchid, which he brought with him each day for safekeeping. Its ethereal white petals seemed to glow in the dim light. "My wife and I," Arthur said, his voice thick with memory, "we started our first garden on a patch of land the bank called Unusable. Solid clay and rocks. Alara didn't see a problem. She saw a challenge in communication." He smiled sadly. She'd talked to the seeds before she planted them. Silly, I thought, but they always grew for her. This orchid, it was her greatest success. It shouldn't survive in this dry air, but it does. Kalen looked from the impossible orchid to the determined sprout, then to the old man whose eyes held the weight of a lifetime of love and loss. For the first time, it occurred to him that the most valuable data wasn't stored on a server. It was stored in the memories and hands of people like Arthur. He felt a profound sense of shame for his arrogance, for his blindness. He had been trying to conquer nature, while this old man was simply having a conversation with it. "How did you know?" Kalen asked again, but this time the question was different. It wasn't about technique. How did you know what it needed? Arthur looked at him, his gaze deep and knowing. "You have to be quiet enough to hear what hurts," he said. "The same is true for plants as it is for people." The sprout grew. Within days, it was joined by others. A small, vibrant patch of green was spreading across Bed 7. The quiet pilgrimage to the dome's window turned into a lunchtime ritual for many employees. They called it Arthur's Patch. It was a symbol. It proved that a different way was possible. This shift did not go unnoticed by Marcus Thorne. He saw the admiration in the employees' eyes when they looked at the old man. He heard the whispers that questioned the millions he had spent on the failing automated systems. Arthur's success was a direct indictment of his own authority and expertise. It made him look incompetent, and he could not tolerate it. Jealousy, sharp and acidic, curdled in his gut. He had to put an end to it. He had to prove that the old man's way was just a fluke, a sentimental fantasy that had no place in a data-driven corporation. On Thursday night, long after Arthur had gone home and the last employees had left, Thorne used his executive key card to enter the biodome. He moved with a grim purpose, his face a mask of resentment. He carried a heavy-duty sprayer, the kind used for industrial herbicides. But it wasn't filled with poison. That would be too obvious. He had done his research. It was a highly concentrated saline solution. It wouldn't kill the plants immediately, but it would make the soil toxic, unable to absorb water, effectively choking the life from the roots. It would look like a natural, catastrophic failure of the plot. He would then write a report full of complex data about how the organic method was unstable and led to a total soil salinization event. He would be the hero who exposed the folly. He stood over Arthur's patch, the healthy green leaves seeming to mock him. With a cold, tight smile, he drenched the plot, the clear liquid soaking into the rich, dark earth Arthur had so painstakingly cultivated. He emptied the entire canister, ensuring the salt content was lethally high. He then slipped out, wiping his key card data from the local entry log. A simple trick for a man who knew the system's backdoors. He was sure he had left no trace. The next morning, Arthur arrived with his wheelbarrow and a thermos of chamomile tea. Lena met him, her face bright with excitement. "Arthur, you have to see. A tiny tomato plant has started to flower." But as they entered the dome, the words died in her throat. The vibrant green of Arthur's patch was gone. The leaves were wilted, curled, and turning a sickly brown-black. The soil, once dark and moist, was crusted with a faint white film. The air smelled sharp and sterile, like a chemical spill. The little tomato flower had collapsed, its petals already shriveling. Lena gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "What happened?" Arthur knelt down, his movements slow and pained, as if his own heart had been poisoned. He touched a wilted leaf, then crumbled a piece of the stiff, salty soil in his fingers. He brought it to his nose, then touched it to his tongue. His face, usually so calm, hardened with a deep, sorrowful understanding. He didn't look angry. He looked heartbroken. "Someone," he said, his voice a low, gravelly whisper, "has salted the earth." Lena's heartbreak quickly turned to cold fury. This wasn't a random system malfunction. This was an attack. It was a deliberate act of cruelty aimed not just at the plants, but at the gentle old man who had nurtured them. While Arthur, with a heavy heart, began the painstaking work of remediation, bringing in fresh water to try and flush the salt from his poisoned plot, Lena went to work. She knew Thorne was behind this. She had seen the venom in his eyes whenever he looked at Arthur, but she needed proof. She went to her desk and opened the building's master security log. As she suspected, Thorne had wiped the local entry data for the dome's door. It was a clean job. For any normal audit, it would look like the door hadn't been opened all night. But Lena wasn't a normal auditor. She was a coder. She knew that even deleted data leaves a ghost. She didn't look at the door logs. Instead, she accessed the network data for the dome's internal lighting system. The lights were on a smart grid, adjusting their intensity based on ambient light and motion sensors to save energy. At 11:42 p.m., the lights in Zone 2, the area directly over Bed 7, had subtly brightened for 7 minutes. The exact amount of time it would take for the motion sensor to register movement and then dim again. It was something, but it wasn't enough. It didn't place Thorne in the room. Lena dug deeper, her fingers flying across the keyboard. She cross-referenced the lighting data with the building's HVAC logs. At 11:43 p.m., the air circulation unit in Thorne's executive office, 2 floors up, had momentarily paused and then restarted. It was a barely perceptible flicker in the system, the kind that happens when a large amount of power is drawn from the same circuit. Like, for instance, the power drawn when an executive remotely accesses a secure system to wipe a security log. It was the digital fingerprint, the ghost in the machine. She compiled her findings, the lighting logs, the HVAC data, and a chart showing that Thorne was the only executive with both the access privileges and the registered office on that specific power circuit. She printed it all out, her hand shaking not with fear, but with righteous indignation. She didn't email it. She didn't send it up the chain of command. She walked straight to Kalen Vance's office. His assistant tried to stop her, but Lena walked right past, not even breaking her stride. Kalen looked up from a stack of dismal financial projections, his face a mass of irritation. Petrova, what is it now? I've heard about the plot. The experiment is over. No, Lena said, her voice ringing with conviction as she slapped the file down on his desk. It's not over. It was sabotaged, and this is the man who did it. Kalen looked at her, then down at the file. He opened it. He read the first page, his brow furrowed. He read the second, and his expression began to change. The irritation was replaced by a slow-burning rage. He saw the cold, calculated malice in the data. He saw the betrayal, not just of a project, but of the flicker of hope he had allowed himself to feel. He remembered Arthur's words, "You have to be quiet enough to hear what hurts." And right now, the entire company felt like it was screaming. He closed the file, his knuckles white. He looked at Lena, his eyes like chips of ice. "Call an emergency board meeting," he said, his voice dangerously calm. "Get everyone in the main conference room. Now, and make sure Marcus Thorne is front and center." The emergency board meeting was tense. The board members, a collection of stern-faced men and women who represented the money behind ataraxia, filed in, their expressions a mixture of impatience and concern. They assumed they were there to discuss the final nail in the biodome's coffin. Marcus Thorne arrived looking smug, carrying a tablet loaded with his prepared report on the failure of sentimental horticulture. He sat near the head of the table, ready to deliver the killing blow to Kalen's ill-advised experiment. Kalen entered last, followed by Lena. He didn't take his seat. He stood at the head of the table, the file in his hand. "Thank you all for coming on short notice," he began, his voice devoid of emotion. "We're not here to discuss the failure of the Bed 7 experiment. We're here to discuss an act of industrial sabotage perpetrated by a member of our executive team." A ripple of shock went through the room. Thorne's smug expression faltered, replaced by a flicker of alarm. "Yesterday," Kalen continued, "Plot 7 was deliberately destroyed, and the man responsible is in this room." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. He then looked directly at Thorne. "Marcus, would you care to explain your whereabouts at 11:42 last night?" Thorne forced a laugh. "Kalen, this is absurd. I was at home. Of course. This is a pathetic attempt to shift blame for your pet project's failure." "Is it?" Kalen said softly. He nodded to Lena, who tapped a key on her laptop. The main screen at the front of the room lit up, displaying the data she had compiled. It showed the motion-activated lighting logs from Zone 2. It showed the power surge from Thorne's office circuit. It showed his security credentials as the only ones capable of executing the log wipe. The data was simple, elegant, and irrefutable. It was a story told in code, and its conclusion was damning. Thorne's face went white. The blood drained from it, leaving a pasty, grayish mass of pure panic. That's circumstantial. It proves nothing." "Then perhaps this will," Kalen said. He nodded to Lena again. This time, a video file played. It was from a secondary high-angle security camera in the hallway outside the dome. One Thorne hadn't known was on a separate server. The footage was grainy, but the image was clear. Marcus Thorne, carrying a sprayer, entering the dome at 11:41 p.m. and exiting 7 minutes later. The boardroom was utterly silent. The board members stared, horrified. From the screen to the trembling executive, Thorne opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He had been so sure of his own cleverness, so certain of the system he thought he controlled. Kalen walked over to where Thorne sat. "You didn't just kill a few plants, Marcus," he said, his voice low and laced with contempt. "You tried to kill the first real sign of hope this company has had in a year. You did it out of jealousy and fear. And for that, there is no place for you here." He pointed to the door. "You're fired. Security will escort you from the building. Your assets will be frozen pending a full investigation into financial damages." Thorne, utterly defeated, stood up and, without looking at anyone, walked out of the room where 2 security guards were waiting. After he was gone, Kalen faced a stunned board. "This," he said, gesturing to the damning evidence, "is the culture of fear and ego that has been poisoning this company. A culture I have allowed to fester. That ends today." He took a deep breath. "The Biodome project is no longer under my direct control. I am officially handing it over to the only person who has demonstrated an ability to create life instead of just measuring it." He looked out the window to where Arthur, on his hands and knees, was still patiently flushing the poisoned soil. "I'm putting Arthur Pendleton in charge. He will have unlimited resources, my full authority, and he will report directly to me. We're going to do this his way." The lead investor, the man who had written the ultimatum letter, stood up. He had been watching Kalen with a new, profound respect. "It's the boldest and best decision you've made since you took over this company, son," he said. "The board is with you, unanimously." The transition was, at first, awkward. The team of scientists and botanists that Kalen had fired were rehired, this time with a new, bewildering mandate. Their boss was not a PhD from MIT, but an 82-year-old former night watchman in overalls. They returned humbled, confused, and deeply skeptical. Arthur held his first team meeting, not in a conference room, but standing in the center of the dome, beside his slowly recovering plot. He didn't issue commands or present a PowerPoint. He simply held up a handful of the rich, dark compost he had made. "This is our goal," he said, his voice quiet but carrying through the vast space. "Not to master the environment, but to become its partner. Your technology," he said, nodding to the data scientist, "is a remarkable tool for listening, but we've been using it to shout. From now on, we listen first." He didn't discard their technology. He repurposed it. He had the data scientists write algorithms not to measure nutrient absorption, but to track the spread of the mycorrhizal networks. He had them use thermal imaging to find cold, compacted spots in the soil, areas that needed aeration. He tasked the botanists with researching historical companion planting combinations from indigenous cultures around the world. He didn't command, he mentored. He would walk with the lead botanist, a woman named Dr. Eris, and point out the subtle curl of a leaf. "She's not getting enough sun here," he'd say. "Her neighbor is too tall. She needs a friend who stays low to ground." Dr. Eris, who was used to thinking in terms of lumen output and chemical compounds, slowly began to see the dome not as a collection of specimens, but as a neighborhood. The work was slow and methodical. They ripped out the automated injectors. They brought in tons of organic material. They started massive compost piles and worm farms. The employees of Ataraxia would watch, fascinated, as their pristine, sterile campus began to incorporate the beautiful, messy reality of nature. The dome began to change. The scent of decay was replaced by the smell of damp earth, of chlorophyll, of blossoms. The uniform green of the initial planting was replaced by a chaotic, vibrant tapestry of colors and textures. Plants grew not in neat rows, but in sprawling, interconnected communities. The air grew thick and humid, buzzing with the sound of pollinators they had introduced. It was no longer a silent museum. It was a jungle. One afternoon, Arthur brought the Lara's Hope orchid from a security booth and found a place for it on the trunk of a large fig tree, nestled in a patch of moss. He knew it was time. The dome was finally safe. A week later, Lena rushed to find him. "Arthur, you have to come see." He followed her to the fig tree. There, nestled in the moss, the ghost orchid had produced a new bloom. But this one was different from all the others. At the very center of its spectral white petals was a single, tiny, perfect teardrop of blushing pink, a color it had never shown before. It was as if the orchid, feeling the life of the thriving jungle around it, was finally happy enough to blush. The dome wasn't just restored. It was alive in a way it had never been before, producing something new, something unexpected, something beautiful. It had found its joy. The story of the living biodome and the old night watchman who saved it became a legend, first within the tech community, then beyond. Ataraxia Corp, once on the brink of failure, was now hailed as a visionary. Journalists and documentary crews replaced the worried investors. The company's stock soared, but for a new reason. People weren't investing in their code anymore. They were investing in their philosophy. Kalen Vance, transformed by the experience, rebranded the entire corporation. The sleek, sterile logo was replaced by one that incorporated a leaf and a circuit board intertwined. The new motto, displayed prominently at the entrance of the campus, read, "Ataraxia, nature's wisdom amplified." He created a new, permanent division, the Pendleton Division of Living Systems. Arthur was named its director. Arthur laughed when he saw the title on his new office door, an office he rarely used, preferring to be in the dome. "I'm a gardener, son, not a director," he told Kalen. But he accepted the role, knowing it would give him the resources to do more good. His first act as director was not to hire more scientists, but to work with Kalen to establish the Alara Pendleton Foundation, a non-profit funded by a percentage of Ataraxia's profits. Its sole mission was to build and support community gardens in underserved urban neighborhoods and schools. One sunny afternoon, Arthur was giving a tour of the biodome to a group of wide-eyed environmental science students from the local university. The dome was a symphony of life. Monkeys chattered in the canopy. Iridescent blue butterflies flitted through the air, and the scent of 1,000 different blossoms hung heavy and sweet. A young student, holding a tablet and looking overwhelmed by the sheer vitality of the place, raised her hand. "Mr. Pendleton," she asked, "you've achieved what multi-billion-dollar corporations have failed to do. What's the secret? Is it a special nutrient? A new kind of soil?" Arthur stopped beside a trickling waterfall, its stones covered in lush green moss. He smiled his gentle smile. "There is no secret," he said. "There is only a principle. For decades, we have been building things for the world. We build houses, we build machines, we build software. We impose our will upon the raw materials. But you cannot build a forest. You can only invite one." He gestured to the thriving ecosystem around them. This was not built. This was invited. We provided the safety, the community, and the nourishment. Life did the rest. The secret, if there's one, is to stop being an architect and start being a host. A gracious host. He led them toward the exit. As they left, one of the students noticed a main plaque by the entrance. She had expected to see a list of donors, investors, and executives. But the polished bronze plaque read differently. It was titled, "The Community of the Dome." And below, in elegant script, were not human names, but the Latin names of the key species: Ficus bengalensis, Philodendron gloriosum, Attacus atlas, Lumbricus terrestris, and at the very bottom, a single line, and all the unseen microbes, fungi, and partners who make our life possible. Welcome home. It was a tribute not to the conquerors, but to the community itself, and that, the students realized, was the most profound innovation of all. The story could have ended there, with the thriving dome and the successful company. But the real change wasn't in the building, it was in the people. The Alara Pendleton Foundation became Kalen's new obsession. He poured his energy into it with the same intensity he had once reserved for stock prices. On a bright Saturday morning in a bleak, concrete-heavy neighborhood downtown, a new community garden was being inaugurated. It was a plot of land that had been a derelict parking lot just 3 months prior. Now it was filled with raised garden beds, a small greenhouse built from recycled materials, and the laughter of children. Kalen was there, not in a suit, but in jeans and a t-shirt, his hands smudged with dirt. He wasn't giving a speech or cutting a ribbon. He was kneeling on the ground, showing a small girl with bright, curious eyes how to gently place a tomato seedling into the soil. "You see," he said softly, mimicking Arthur's gentle tone, "you have to make sure she feels safe. Tuck her in, like you're putting a baby to bed." The little girl giggled and patted the soil around the seedling. "Good night, tomato," she whispered. Arthur watched from a nearby bench, sitting with Lena, who was now the CEO of Ataraxia. She had her own small seedling tray on her lap. "Look at him," Lena said, a proud smile on her face. "Our CEO, the master of the universe, talking to tomatoes." "He's not talking to the tomato," Arthur corrected gently. "He's talking to the little girl, and he's listening to himself. He's finally learning the language." Later, as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the new garden, Arthur walked over to a new plaque they had just installed at the entrance. It was identical to the one at the Biodome, a tribute to the community of the garden. He ran his gnarled fingers over the cool metal. He felt a hand on his shoulder. It was Kalen. "She would have loved this, Arthur," Kalen said quietly. "Alara?" "Yes," Arthur said, his eyes misting over. "She would have. She always believed the garden was the best way to mend a broken piece of the world." He turned to Kalen. "You've done a good thing here, son. A very good thing." Kalen looked out over the garden, where families were watering their plots and children were chasing butterflies. "You taught me that a company's real value isn't its market cap," he said. "It's the amount of life it nurtures in the world, in the soil and in its people." A gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the new trees they had planted. It felt like an answer, a thank you. Arthur reached into his pocket and pulled out his old leather-bound notebook. He handed it to Kalen. "I'm finished with this now," he said. "My notes are complete. Perhaps you'll find a use for it." Kalen took the notebook as if it were a sacred text. He opened it. The pages were filled with Arthur's shaky handwriting. Sketches of leaves, notes on soil and pressed flowers. On the very last page, there was a single sentence written years ago, but its truth was timeless. The greatest technology we will ever create is a community that cares. Kalen closed the book, his heart full. He looked at the old man who had saved his company, and in doing so, had saved him from himself. "Thank you, Arthur," he whispered, "for everything." Arthur just smiled, his eyes twinkling in the golden light. "The pleasure," he said, "was all mine." He was no longer a night watchman. He was a gardener, and his garden was finally the whole world. If this story of patience, wisdom, and growth resonated with you, we'd be honored to know. Where in the world are you today? And what are you nurturing in your own life? Share with us in the comments below. Your story matters. For more tales that remind us of the quiet power of wisdom and the beauty of a life lived in harmony with the world, please consider subscribing and turning on notifications. We're building a community that believes in growing, not just building. Thank you for being a part of it. Until next time, be kind, be patient, and listen to the whispers of the world around you.